Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fall Science Symposium of the week-long National Atmospheric Deposition Program meeting. My name is Linda Geiser. I've been serving as the chair of the NADP Executive Committee for the past year, along with 3 other elected officers, John Walker, who's been our past chair, and Mike Bell, our vice chair, and Melissa Kuchalski, our secretary. And one of the traditions of the NADP program is at the end of the executive committee meeting, which we had yesterday, turning over of the gavel and the officers' positions to the newly elected officers. Well, some of them are just continuing on. Which will be myself as past chair, Mike Bell as your new chair, Melissa as the vice chair, and Catherine Collins as our new secretary. So we're going to start the meeting off with the transfer of the officers, meaning me to Mike. But thank you anyway all for coming. It's wonderful to have you all here, to be meeting in person, and thank you for participating and contributing to this symposium, which is looking already to be a great success, thanks to Mike's wonderful organization. So Mike, I will officially turn the gavel over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with my newfound power, we'll call this meeting to order. So I've been a part of NADP for a long time, and I've always kind of told people that at NADP, the science is great and the people are greater. So wanted to first start off by introducing myself a little bit, and then also introducing some of the leads of the science committees. So for some of you newer people, you have a better sense of who's kind of in charge and whatnot. So I started as an outdoor kid. I really like this picture in the middle of me in the Appalachians, looking out over all of that dirty air before Jim Renfro got to it. And from there, became a plant guy. Stuck my nose in the dirt, started finding all of these cryptic desert wildflowers. And then while at Joshua Tree National Park, started hearing about air pollution, how this was affecting our plants, how this was changing the growth of invasive species and causing fires to proliferate throughout the desert, which led me to grad school where I studied isotopes, looking for bugs, letting them denitrify, all that nitrogen coming down, which then led me to the National Park Service Air Resources Division, where now I get to go out in the field, collect dragonflies looking for mercury, measure trees and lichens, seeing how they're changing due to air pollution, and look at stream water chemistry and how we're restoring those areas. But mostly I'm just a propagandist, selling the good word of NADP, of CLAD, of these different science committees. So I collected my first NADP sample back in 2004 when I was a seasonal employee at Craters of the Moon National Monument. Didn't know what these big buckets were, what these big black boxes were, but even at that point, precipitation, like rain, was new to me coming from Southern California. So I thought it was novel that we were trying to figure out what was in the air, like at these kind of faraway places. Then when I went to Joshua Tree, I was basically the main site operator for California 67 from 2005 to 2007. But it took me until 2010 to attend my first NADP meeting, which was at the Ritz-Carlton, which I was like, damn, this is a fancy organization. I came in, there was like a robe, there was a fire in the fireplace, the soft music playing, and I was like, I'm gonna like it here. From there, came back to the NPS in 2015, where and then eventually joined the CLAD executive team, and now part of this NADP executive team. So I'm going to go through each of the science committees that have been meeting over the last couple days. Can everyone just please stand up from each of these committees so people know who you are and can talk to you at the breaks if they need to. So our executive committee is John Walker, Linda Geiser, myself, and Melissa Puchalski. And as Linda said, John's rotating off. Catherine Collins is coming in, but this is the team that's been working towards this meeting. So can you all stand up real quick? Is anyone else? John's back. All right. So we have our aeroallergen monitoring science committee, which is advancing aeroallergens like pollens and things like that monitoring. We've got Andy Johnson and Selma Eisel. Either of them here? No. Okay. The next is the critical loads of atmospheric deposition. So Jeremy Ash, Niffer Wilkening, and Chris Novak. So Chris is back here. Thank you. Next is the education and outreach. And we had a little switch here where Catherine is now coming into the secretary position, and Chris Rogers is staying on as co-chair. So we have Emmy Felker-Quinn, Beck Dalton, and Catherine Collins. And EOS is really like in charge of doing the education and outreach part of this, where they're creating these data products that you'll helping create them that you'll find on the front desk. And then mercury in the environment and links to deposition, our MELD group, which is looking at mercury and effects. So we have Colleen Flanagan-Pritt, Rick Hoiber, and Kat Coe. Thank you. And then I think lastly for the groups, we have our network operations. So this group is kind of focused on station siting, equipment, measurements, and all of the above. We have Tim Chirac, Mike McHale, and Winston Luke. Got Tim, Mike. Awesome. Thank you all. And lastly, lastly for the science committees, we have TDEP, which is total deposition, which is taking our measurements and these the chemistry models and creating this measurement model fusion product to create more accurate maps. So we use both for ecosystem analysis as well as knowing what's actually coming down in these different areas. So we have Ryan Fulgham, Amanda Cole, and Colleen Boblitz. So, awesome. Thank you. And then lastly, I wanted to acknowledge the National Analytical Lab. These are the people who work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who take in all the samples that are collected in the field, do the analysis, create the data, and create the maps and everything else that we use within NADP. So is anyone from the NOW, you want to stand up? And thank you. Okay, so the meeting theme that I had kind of chosen as I was putting this together was climate change impacts on air quality. And I think in part this is like, this year has been, I mean honestly, like since 2020, I feel like every giant event has gotten worse in terms of relationships to climate, but we're seeing this big increase in temperatures in significant events, and that's going to be impacting both our monitoring and the science that comes out of it. So I just highlighted a couple things that are changing and how these things might be affecting the NADP network and how I think we need to think about this moving forward. So one is like increase in extreme precipitation events. So how is this going to impact our data collection and our extrapolation of that data? Will flooding occur at sites and prevent access? And how is this going to impact like surface waters that are being impacted by deposition if we're getting these high flow events in the area? The next is thinking about increased temperatures. We have to worry about site operator safety, equipment integrity at higher temperatures, as well as sample consistency and these links to ecological processes. Like, are we hitting, like going past the extremes of where species can occur and is nitrogen or sulfur affecting this? Next is drought, kind of the same concept of we need to enhance dry deposition monitoring in these places where deposition isn't occurring, as well as thinking about atmospheric changes when there's less moisture in the air. And then wildfires. I mean, we have a smoke session today that I'm excited about. Do we need to increase smoke monitoring, like increase black carbon measurements within our deposition collectors? Are there additional pollutants we should be looking at? And how are forest fires, or how are forests recovering from deposition after they've been burned, or how are they recovering from fires after they've been burned and are in high deposition areas? So when I was thinking about climate, first thing I thought about was like coal-fired power plants, increasing CO2 in the atmosphere and causing a lot of the deposition problems we initially were measuring. And in thinking about that, like I was familiar with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign and like how they were using advocacy to reduce the, to close power plants and reduce that pollutant coming from them. So I was really excited when our keynote, Holly Bender, agreed to speak with us today, and I'm looking forward to learning more about how their efforts overlap with ours and what they're working on as we're reducing the number of power plants that are available, what we're looking towards the future to continue reducing climate-forcing gases being released in the atmosphere. So, quick overview of the symposium. We have 3 sessions today, the first being ecological effects of deposition, the second being measurements of aeroallergens and wildfire smoke, and the third is deposition and effects of mercury, toxics, and hazardous air pollutants, followed by a poster session at 6:30. That's going to be at the Pyle Center, which is 2 blocks up this way, and it's going to be on the first floor in the back of the building, right by the water. So we'll have nice views of hopefully the sunset and talk some more science at the end of the day. Tomorrow we have 4 more sessions, 2 sessions on measurements of atmospheric pollution, a session on modeling atmospheric concentrations, and then a second session on mercury, toxics, and hazardous air pollutants. And lastly, there's still spots in the field trip. So if you want to come learn about EPIC Systems renewable energy, visit an NADP site at Devil's Lake, and then hike through some of the remaining fall colors. You're more than welcome to join us. Just talk to Anita at the front desk. And with that, I will introduce Jamie Schauer, the director of the Wisconsin State Lab of Hygiene. Thank you, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Mike. I just really wanted to do a quick welcome to everybody here. For those who don't know me, my name is Jamie Schauer. I've been a faculty member here at the University of Wisconsin for about 25 years, and I currently serve as the director for the Wisconsin State Laboratory of Hygiene. Just real quick, the Wisconsin State Laboratory of Hygiene is the public health laboratory and environmental laboratory for the state of Wisconsin. We're really the only public health lab in the country or in the world where the public health lab is integrated with a university. So the benefit of NADP residing within the state lab is we get the benefit of the state laboratory capacities, but also the university capacity. So it's a unique arrangement, and I would say that I think most would agree this has been a very good place for NADP over the last several years. I guess I also wanted to just welcome everybody here to the Fluno Center. I don't think we've ever been here before as NADP, but this is a place that for the 25 years I've been on campus, I've had many things in this building, in this room specifically, and it's another place to see a nice part of campus. We do have our annual infectious disease conference for the State Lab of Hygiene in this room. So if you guys want to come back to Madison twice in the spring, you can come back for our infectious disease meeting and for the spring meeting. But I just really I'm looking forward to today's meeting. I'm excited to see all the different talks that we have listed. I think it's important to acknowledge that in the context of climate change, I'd say I have 2 angles on this, thinking about how NADP can better address and integrate within this sort of nexus of air quality and climate change, but also recognizing all the things that we already do that are really connected with that, things that we monitor and thinking about looking at our data and things that we've been doing that are of that nexus and interface. So I think I'm looking forward to all the talks in the poster session tonight to really look about how we are doing and what we're doing to address this issue as well. So with that, welcome again, and I guess I'm now going to introduce, I don't know if it's the next slide here, nope, not, David Gay, who, for those who don't know, is the program coordinator, and he's going to give an update on the status of NADP. So, thank you.
Good morning. For those of you who are new or younger than me, which is basically everybody in this room, my name's David Gay. I'm the coordinator, as close to being sort of like the manager of the unwieldy NADP, large and unwieldy NADP. But let me first start by saying welcome very much. Wonderful to see you all here. Although this meeting can be a pain to put together, and my staff will certainly acknowledge that, this is probably my favorite day of the year. I love giving this talk. I like people coming here. It's showing that NADP is relevant to what you're doing. We're making a difference. So I love giving this talk every year. And glad to see everybody here and so many young people. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and you are getting younger, or you are actually, young people are coming, and that's good. They will carry on long after I'm gone. You are in Madison. It's a beautiful town. I am not from here, but I love working here. The fall colors are gorgeous. If you get a chance, please walk around campus. It's a beautiful place to be. With this slide, I wanted to say, Mike, great planning. You are here at basically peak color. I'm sure that went into your planning of when this meeting happened. It is really a gorgeous town, so please get out. Hopefully it'll stop raining. Get out and see the colors. It's gorgeous. So, every year I give what's called the State of the Network. We do sort of the down and dirty stuff. We keep the samples moving, we collect them, we get the data out to you to use for research. And this is a time to sort of give you what I'm seeing as I look out. What does the future look like? When Mike was showing his slides of all the people that are the officers, it made this slide much more important. I think our greatest strength, and I've always said the same thing, is the diversity of this organization. If you're fairly new, get out and talk to people. You're going to talk to people from all over the country that do all kinds of wild stuff. I'm continually amazed at how diverse this is. It helps with finances, but it also helps with ideas. We generate a lot of very good ideas. We don't necessarily have the money to do them all, and it's got to go through the process. You know, we're committee structure and all that sort of stuff, but diversity for NADP has always been our greatest strength, and that continues. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I decided that if I was a newspaper editor, and I'm a newspaper reader, for those of you who've never seen the white pieces of paper that open up, I still do that, and my kids still laugh at me about that, but if I had to write headlines, what would my headlines be? And the first one is, for NTN, long-term stability in sites and measurements. Believe it or not, NTN is as large today as it was when I started, and I started in 2003. It's been pretty consistent in the quality of measurements and in the number of measurements, and that tells me people are using the data, and that's a good thing. And so that's my headline for NTN out in the future. Stable. For MDN, we've had some site losses, and we've talked a lot about that in committee, but I think that has stopped. We're currently at 85 sites and have been there now for a couple of years. I think that slide has stopped and the measurements will continue for MDN. We need some more sites in the West. That's a problem we all recognize, and we're working on that. So that's my headline for MDN. For AMON, again, we've had some recent significant site loss, but I don't see that continuing. So we're running right at about 190 to 100 sites for AMON, and people are beginning to use that data. I count publications that use our data every year, and AMON is pretty significant. So people are seeing that data and they are valuing that data. So I see AMON going for a long time. Stable. My headline for mercury litterfall, I'm amazed. It's growing, and it's growing solidly. And so I think this is growing into a significant network. It's about 25, 28 sites now. We gain a few every year. So I think that's in for the long term. AMNet, that's the one that keeps me up at night. AMNet is struggling. We know that, we see that, we begin to make some changes, but I think we're going to have to do something a little bit differently, but we've still got some time to figure that out. So that's my headline for AMNet. NADP overall, I'd say we're in pretty good shape. Could be a whole lot worse. We have our problems, but in general, I think we're doing a pretty good job at what we want to do. We've got a number of changes that we need to make. I list a few here. We need to improve the data speed that we get the data to you. You guys want it faster. We need to do it faster. I'm a money guy. We always need to reduce costs. If we can make measurements cheaper, then that means we can continue to make them longer and make more of them, and we have things to do there, and we've got plans in place, and those are walking through. And there are a lot of ideas floating around in the back. If you have not gone to the committee meetings, there are a lot of ideas about new things we should be monitoring for. What does the research community need? And growth is always good. Well, maybe not always good, but generally growth is good. And new things, we need to stay relevant, and that is happening in the past, or in the background. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. Someone put on my thing, glass half full. And if you've been around a little bit, I see things from a positive standpoint. I see a glass half full. I have been accused of wearing rose-colored glasses. So I'm going to break that tradition today. No. It's not all good, but in general, we're pretty good. NADP is a business. This is sort of my first sort of problem, but I think it's certainly not the end of the world. Funding is never too good, right? We can always use more money. We can always have more sites. The issue we have at the moment is we don't have a lot of flexibility. 5 years ago, we had extra money in the bank. We had flexibility. If a good idea came up, we could throw some money at it and attack it, figure it out. We don't necessarily have that flexibility at the moment. Inflation, you guys are all seeing that in your own organizations. What's inflation going to be like over the next 12 months? I don't know. It seems to be getting a little bit better, but we don't have a lot of financial flexibility at the moment. But I guess my point of this slide, and back to my rose-colored glasses, is it's not the end of the world. We bring in $2.85 million. That's still a lot of money, you know? I'd love to have an extra million hanging around so we could do a lot of these really cool things, but we still bring in a lot of money. We can still do a lot of good things with this money, and we're smart people. We can figure this out. It's not the end of the world. We'll get through it, right? So I try to keep myself in that sort of view. We can weather this. We can figure it out. So it's not the end of the world. So a few more business notes. We have a lot of cost savings in the works. That's one thing we can do at the program office. And in the labs, we can figure out how to make the measurements cheaper. And if that I see as our job, and we will continue to do that. We've got to get our shipping costs under control. We know that's a problem. For those of you that don't go to the committees, we spent about last year we spent $250,000 in shipping. That's a big bill, that hurts. So we're working on that. We can't just necessarily hire people to do work we want to do, so we're looking at considering some more laboratory automation, but I think people on the younger side would say that's normal, you should do that. That's just progress, it's the way everything's working. So we're looking at some automation activities to make things easier and better. We're considering a new AMON sampler. What got that going was cost of the network, but we may end up with something that's easier and faster to save money for everybody. And we're considering other ways to get dry deposition out of the AmNet Mercury network. So there are a lot of things in play that should help this big issue that we have. And that's, tighter money and all that sort of thing. Do more with less. So back to my next regular. Things are good. I have noticed recently, I should step back and say, when people are considering starting a new site, usually what they do is pick up the phone and call me. And so I hear about what people are thinking about doing, adding new sites. And I think this is a good sign. People have begun to call me again. For about 2 years, pretty lonely guy. But that started to happen again. And again, taking the long view, that's a good thing. They're thinking about joining the network. They're not showing up in my office with wads of cash yet, but people are beginning to ask, and so I figure that's a good thing. And also, something I noticed a couple of days ago, we produce something we jokingly call the sites in jeopardy. It's a list of sites that people tell us are about to close or they're thinking of closing. That list is really short. Probably the shortest it's been since I've been coordinator. And that's another good sign. And those two things together, I think, are a good sign for us. People are beginning to think about networks. They have some money, they're thinking. So both signs are good, in my opinion. For COVID, we may disagree on this. I generally think of COVID as being over. You may or may not. But it didn't really have the impact that many of us worried it would. I think, Richard, the number was like 6% of samples during that first year we lost. We expected it to be a lot worse than that. And I know, as a scientist, that COVID's not really over. But if you look back at the COVID period, we weathered it pretty well. I was very happy. The current year, for those of you who've been waiting, the 2022 data is up. We've produced the map summary. Data is complete online for all of the networks through the end of 2022, starting on 2023. The annual summary, we made a decision last year not to print it. So if you want to read it, you got to go get it online. That's a problem for me, but probably a problem for me. No, probably not a problem for anybody else. But it's produced, it's online. It's in a real cool thing that you can squish it and it looks like paper and it makes it sound like changing the pages, which I really love. So it's all digital. And I think Richard got that up online this morning. And I also wanted to thank Mike McHale for his contribution to the annual summary this year. He did some of the trends work. So thank you, Mike. Again, at our core, we are a national research support project. That comes from our relationship with State Ag Experiment Station and NIFA in the Department of Agriculture. Our job is to produce data that researchers want. And in that, I count the publications, the journal publications and agency reports that use our data on an annual basis. And this is where the data was used and was published in 2022. We had 183 publications that used our data in some way. They used it for their models, they compared to us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little lower than we traditionally do. We usually have somewhere around 220. Maybe I was not very good at finding them last year. Maybe it was lower, but it's still a very respectable number, 183. Most of the data appeared in Science of the Total Environment. They had 16 publications. Technical difficulty. Sorry about that. There were 11 agency reports that used our data. A very important one, 9 master's theses and 8 doctoral dissertations used our data, and that's an important statistic to me, and it's an important statistic to USDA. They like to see students using the data. And then 1 more, atmospheric chemistry and physics. I usually put this chart up. These are the types of departments that are using our data to do theses and dissertations. Typically, biology and ecology is number 1, civil engineering, but our data, I think, it's important that our data is being used by a wide variety of departments. Again, reflecting the wide variety of research that we do. Here is getting back to that MDN issue. Here's the MDN map from 2022, and you can see there's a big part of the country way out west that doesn't have any color on it, and that's because we don't have any sites out there. We've lost primarily sites that were in the west, and so we're going to work on that problem and see if we can't get this map filled up again. 2008 through about 2014, we were able to map the entire country, and so this problem is on our radar, and we're working to fix it. Some other notes that I think are important. This is a big one in my mind. For those of you that do wet deposition of mercury, we have a very complicated sample train that's very expensive and very easy to break. We're thinking about going over to a plastic bag, PET plastic, that we think probably, at least in my opinion, I think will probably be cleaner than the glassware is now. It's definitely going to be a whole lot less expensive. And as for those of you that pay for MDN sites, you know that an MDN site is quite expensive to run. And that's primarily because of all the QA we have to take into account when making the sampler. So I think that this change, which is moving through the process, will make MDN sites a lot less expensive to run, and that should help with that hole we have in the west. Another couple of notes. As of yesterday, we have a new pilot PFAS network. For those of you that aren't necessarily in the PFAS business, we're beginning to measure PFAS compounds in precipitation. It's some work that Martin is leading, and I saw him this morning. Very exciting. There is, as you know, or as you likely know by reading in the newspaper again, PFAS is all over the news. There's a lot of worry about it. It seems to be everywhere, and so we're beginning to make fundamental measurements in the PFAS area, and that is in what we call a pilot status. We're going to kick the tires on the network and make sure that we're getting it and doing that work correctly. And then at some point in the future, probably next year, a decision will be made by executive as to whether that will continue on as a full, this is designed as a sub-network to NTN, so it will be an easy add-on for people that run NTN sites. It is my sense that this will most likely happen, but I'm not the decider. I follow orders, or that's my job to follow orders. Whether I follow or not is another question, I guess. We're also thinking about black carbon and precipitation. I don't know how many of you realize this or not, but we now have a year's worth of observations of black carbon concentrations in precipitation at 12 sites. Ross Edwards will tell you a little bit more about that today, so you'll be wanting to watch for that in today's proceedings. We are also working on measuring total phosphorus and total nitrogen in rainfall. We've got some analytical problems to clear up, and I think that will happen relatively soon. As many of you, hopefully many of you realize, we measure orthophosphate, but we don't do total, and we only measure nitrate and ammonium, and so now we're going to measure total nitrogen, I hope, with the idea of giving data on organic nitrogen, and there's quite a bit of interest in that within the networks. So that's working in the background. And one more, we are considering beginning to make passive mercury measurements, make that a network. That's not nearly as far along as the PFAS network is, but there was a lot of talk yesterday in the committee meetings about making this. It's a very inexpensive way to measure mercury. It doesn't tell you everything you need to know, of course, but it's doable and valuable. And so we're going to consider doing that too as we move into the future. A couple of more things. We got an equipment donation, quite a large one, which is very new. It's never happened before. And it's cool and everything. It's probably $150,000 worth of equipment if we bought it. And, you know, most of you don't care. But the reason why I put this slide up is with this donated equipment to do wet deposition, this is NTN and MDN equipment, we're going to consider a rental option. And the reason why I put this slide up is because this will, I hope, give us an option to reach sort of a new kind of customer. What I'm thinking is this equipment would probably go to like maybe tribes that can't necessarily come up with $112,000, $15,000 to buy the equipment to get up front. They can rent the equipment from us long term and get in easily. Maybe a lot more professors at smaller colleges that don't have huge research budgets, but they've got undergraduates. So we're beginning to go, I hope we go in that direction with this donated equipment. So that's why I put the slide up. Sort of a new way of thinking about trying to get new sites that aren't traditionally in our networks. And two distinctions to note. We don't give out many of these, but yesterday they gave an award to Jim Renfro as one of the most outstanding operators in the network. How many of you guys were in Knoxville? Well, good. And hopefully you went on the trip because the trip was beautiful, and Jim led that trip. How long's Jim been doing this, Christy? 30 years, Jim?
Yes.
Every bit, but well-deserved, well-deserved. So that award was given out, and I think that's probably the second or the third one we've ever given out. And so, good for Jim. Great guy. Like him a lot. And we also gave out the Van Bowersox Meritorious Service Award to Eric Prespo. Eric was fundamental in getting a lot of the Mercury networks going that we run today. Eric's retired. Bum. He beat me. But I would say a well-deserved reward to Eric. And if you know Eric, he was a great guy too. Enjoying the rest of his life out in Seattle. Good for him. So with that, real quickly, I want to walk through the 2022-23 site awards. If you're new to NADP, the operators of the sites are what really makes this network go. You got good operators, you're going to have a good network. If you have bad operators, you're going to have a bad network. And we have a lot of good operators. And so we like to recognize them every 5 years. And so during this year, I'm not going to necessarily read through all of these, but all of these operators have been running their sites for 5 years. And that's quite a long time. How many of you guys have changed a sample? About a third, yeah. It's a pain, particularly in January when the wind's blowing and it's frozen outside. 5 years. This is all of our networks together, a lot of the federal agency sites here, but after that we get to the 10-year awards. And this is getting to be significant. Very few operators make it to 10 years. Steve Alton, Bob Bratlinger, Mike Danglish, Martin Dana, Deborah Kennedy. I'm happy to know that I'm happy to say that I know 3 of those guys, but they've been running since 13. Forest Service, LADCO, Passamaquoddy. 15-year awards. Jim Patton, I've talked to Jim several times. Jana Robinson, I've talked with her. Sergio Fleshek, since 2008, running those. I think that 13 is actually a mistake. It was probably the MDN site for Sergio in the Bronx. 20-year awards. Now you're getting up to a lot of samples. Denise Dixon and John Korfmacher, he's done 20 years for 2 separate networks, or 3 actually. Think about that, 20 years, that's a lot of samples. And we're talking probably down into the 0.5% of operators maybe get to this level. Been doing it for 20 years. A couple more slides. 25-year awards. Charles Welsh, great guy. I like talking to Charles with USGS. Linda Weeks Connor in Montana for the Fort Peck tribes. Linda Madron with USGS in New Mexico. And Jotten Bithorn down in Puerto Rico with USDA Forest Service. 25 years. And the peak, when you get to 30 years, you make it into what I call the Purple Finger Brigade. And that's an old joke back when we had mechanical rain gauges and purple ink. 2 more, Bill Golly and Robert Ziegler with Penn State and Acadia. 30 years of changing NTN samples, and then Bill has also done MDN. A very proud record of accomplishment that very, very few people get. And so they are going to join the list of the really great and dedicated operators that have done it over 30 years. So with that, if there are any operators online, I would like to thank you again. We could not run this network without you. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, go to the back and start listening. But I wanted to say thank you all again for coming. I'm glad to see you here. It's a great network that I've been privileged to work for. Second, I certainly hope you enjoy the meeting. I think there are going to be a lot of very good talks coming up very soon. Please mingle at the breaks. That's where most of the real information gets exchanged, meeting the people around. And finally, if you need anything at all, please let me or Anita know out at the front, and we will make it happen. So with that, I will pass the torch back to Mike.